Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to our continued coverage of the FIDE Candidates 2021, a double round robin 8-player tournament featuring some of the best players in the world to determine who will play against Magnus Carlsen in the World Chess Championship match later this year. I'm excited to announce that for the rest of the tournament, up until Tuesday, April 27th at 1 p.m. Eastern Time, every course on my website, including bundles, 2 courses together, is available for 33% off. The link is in the description. I know you guys like that the code that I dropped a couple of days ago in the Win at Chess episode, and this one will just be 33% off for an entire week, so go take use of that. 4 games, timestamps are in the video player. Let's just jump right into it, and after I will show you the standings. We have our first matchup of the day, features the only 2 people that have won a game in 2021 in this event, because the event obviously stopped in 2020. Yesterday, they both won against Alekseenko, Grischuk, and Maxime, Vachier, Lagrave, respectfully. So, Kirill begins with e4. We're in a top-level chess tournament, so we're probably going to get e5 and c5. Either or. So we have e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, and bishop to c4. This is the Italian. This is the gioco piano. There's a lot of ways to play this. White decides to play not the fried liver. Clearly not a fan of the fried liver. There's obviously a lot of theory involved here with d5, and I'm sure that both of these players are familiar with the Traxler counterattack as well. Memes aside, joking aside, we have d3 and c3. This is kind of the standard meta at the highest level, and now white plays a combination of castling, knight d2, rook e1, sometimes expanding on the queen side. Fabiano plays this setup with h6 and d6. Black in some positions can play pawn to d5. It's a bit more open, a bit more aggressive, but he goes with d6. And there's some positions where black doesn't castle at all and actually plays moves like g5. This is not the setup to do that, because white would be able to just immediately counterattack you in the center or play b4, a4. Also, Fabiano does not need to take such a risk. He just plays short castle. h3 by white. This move is designed to stop bishop or knight coming to g4. Now we have bishop retreating back to b6 voluntarily to get out of the way of any attack on it. And now perhaps we have the strangest move of the opening, although it is basically the best move. That move is knight to e7. A few ideas exist with the move knight to e7. First of all, you want to rotate this way, so you have 2 horses ready to do battle on this side of the board. And also, you want to play c6 and d5. Again, to the untrained eye, this just looks idiotic, but I promise you that this is an entirely different stratosphere of the game of chess we don't fully understand. White plays d4, and now all of that I just said goes out the window, and Fabiano goes back to c6. Why does he go back to c6? Well, this knight was just here, but this pawn cannot go back to the square it was on. You understand? So he baits Alekseenko into committing in the center, and now a move like d5, Fabiano will just go back. And this advancement of the pawn actually hurts white, because now this pawn is just a target, you've blocked your own bishop, and this bishop is super powerful. It's interesting the way chess works. A pawn moving up 2 squares actually provides weakness for one player, not the other. And so for that reason, Alekseenko doesn't do that. He tries to take a little bit of space on this side, maybe wants to play, b4, a5. Fabiano doesn't let him do that. Now bishop retreats back to a2 with the intention to play the knight to this square and go for this bishop. In fact, we have exactly that in the form of a pawn sacrifice. So he allows Caruana to take 2 pawns and then takes on b6. And now here Fabiano plays a very fancy move, high level move, fancy move. And that move is pawn to c2, sacrificing the pawn because he doesn't actually want this pawn to be taken in this way. He would rather his opponent have this structure with the pawn on b2 rather than the pawn on c3. Because if this pawn was on c3, the knight would not be able to jump in. The rook, would be open. It's a very, small differences in the position. So he likes this instead. And now we have a complex middle game where black is up a pawn, and maybe temporarily, but black is up a pawn. But black's structure is just awful. I mean, these pawns are all just scattered. And also white has the bishop pair, so white has a lot of compensation. Bishop to d2, bishop to e6. He immediately goes for the trade. And we have queen b3, which attacks the e6 pawn. It's actually not so easy to defend that pawn. For example, if you play a move like rook to e8, just guarding, I'm going to play rook to d1. Then I'm going to move my bishop to one of these 2 squares. Black is super passive. Like, black has a curse here of having an extra pawn, but is just insanely passive. It's really hard to move anything. You cannot move any of your knights forward. You cannot move any of the pawns forward, because anything you move forward will weaken the corresponding set of squares. So for that reason, Caruana actually just defends one pawn and says, you know what, Kirill, go take my b6 pawn. I don't need it anyway. And now knight to d7. Volunteering another pawn for capture, because then we would get knight to c5. And now the queen is hit. The queen cannot take this. And we've gone from a pawn down to a pawn up for white. But the queen is a bit stuck. And notice, if you hang around, you can actually get your queen trapped. Like, if you don't get out quickly, for example, just rook to d1. Look, rook f7, queen b6. Look at this. Look at this absurd trapping of your queen. Everything is guarding everything else, and the queen has no way out. So Kirill, rather than going in, he just says, you know what, I'm good. Like, thank you very much. I'm gonna take the pawn back, and I'm very happy. Now Fabiano says, okay, e5, queen to d3, queen to e6, and knight c5. And now he's getting out. You got Fabi out in the open. This is not what you want. You do not want Caruana playing on initiative. You really don't want that. So now Alekseenko's like, all right. And notice how Fabiano, his last 4 moves. Look at his last 4 moves. 1 move back, and now he gets 1 move forward, 1 move forward, 1 move forward. And even this subtle move, king to h7, just covering the g6 square so nothing can get there, is going forward. He's making progress every move. Alekseenko brings the rook to d1, and now Fabi lashes out g5. Bang! He's pushing on the same side of the board every move. All it took was Fabi to give up 1 pawn, make 1 backward knight move, and now he's rolling down the board. We have knight back to f3, we have rook to f7, and he's gonna double up. He's gonna bring his rooks. But here the computer really wanted Fabiano to call the bluff and just take this pawn. Just take it. Take the pawn. And he's like, why wouldn't he do that? It's just a free pawn. I would imagine that Fabi didn't like this queen trade. Like, keep in mind, this queen trade is going to happen later as well. And he's got a bit of a weakness on d6. I mean, it's not just a bit of a weakness, it's a pretty big weakness. There's also looming sacrifices on g5, where you can maybe sacrifice the bishop for 2 pawns and then fork the king and the rook. And he would need to get this kind of position. I don't necessarily know what he missed. I haven't asked the guy. I don't have his phone number. Maybe he didn't like the way this could turn out. Perhaps he thought that there was something else. Perhaps he thought that this just didn't fit the style of the position that he was looking to achieve. Maybe like rook e2, bishop e3. He thought that it was just a bit too committal. Or I don't know, maybe he just didn't like bishop takes g5 immediately. But I imagine that that was not the reason, because then... So instead he plays rook f8. I mean, I'm sure he didn't miss that he could take a free pawn. He just misevaluated, because now the problem with the queen trade is that... there's bishop to e3, and Alekseenko can give him either pawn. It's pretty funny. Like, this one tempo of difference allows this rook to d5, and even though you can get another pawn down, you're down 2 pawns now, rook c1, and black can't really move any pieces. It's kind of crazy. Like, this has to stay guarding this. The rook is constantly pressuring. And by the way, you would say, well, why didn't he just go rook b1, like, to take on b7? Well, then the knight is going to come back to c4, and even though he can take 1 pawn, he's not going to get the 2nd pawn. So Alekseenko disallows the knight from moving, then plays rook c2, then plays rook c4. The knight's just stuck. So Fabi either has to repeat here, just repeat moves, which is actually what he did, or go back. And the loss of this pawn is very different, because now he's got way too many pawn weaknesses. So Alekseenko goes for this, wins back this pawn, and we have a lot of hoopla, but we get rook in 3 versus rook in 4. Black has this outside pass pawn. You got to go bring the rook. And the only way here that black can actually hope to achieve anything is to bring the king over here and somehow not allow white to get any of the pawns mobilized. The problem is that as this endgame goes on, white brings the king and now pushes the pawn. It's very important. It's very important, you don't just go to b3, because if you just beeline for this position, for example, I mean, in this particular instance, I guess white would be correct, because it would be check. But if, for example, you gave a check first, king a2, king g2, you can lose this. Like, this is losing. Even though white is up a pawn, the king is infiltrated, all right? The wolf is in the pig pen. Is that a saying? Sheep's pen? I play chess on the internet and make videos. I'm not very good with these sayings. So the king has gotten in, and it's going to take all your pawns. But that's why he goes e5. And he invests in the most important asset, which is his pass pawn. And that forces the other rook to get deflected, right? Now rook a2, very nice move. If rook takes, you promote. And the endgame that we ultimately get features all the rooks being sacrificed and king to g6. The players agreed to a draw here because king g6, you know, this would have been the endgame. So, you say, Levy, that was so boring. You didn't need to cover that. That's 10 minutes. Why'd you just waste 10 minutes of my time? These bozos drew anyway. Look, it's classical chess. I gotta honor all these matchups. Some matchups are exciting, and that game was honestly very complex. It was Alekseenko sacrificing 2 pawns for a dominant clamp on the position, and okay, we have a draw. The second game of the day is the game between Grischuk and Nepo, the 2 Russian players. Nepo obviously in first place. We gotta feature his game. And well, surprise, surprise, I mean, it's Nepo, it's a Grunfeld. It's a Grunfeld defense. But this game was interesting because it was an exchange. This is the mainline Grunfeld. All of this, c5, the idea to laser beam the pawns. And here, rook b1 is played so that you don't walk into a fork if you ever move your d-pawn, castles. And potentially already the most surprising move of the game. Here, just everybody goes bishop e2. Everybody. Everybody. And Grischuk plays a move that like 5 people have played, and I think most of them school children. Like, this move, as normal as it looks, to stop bishop g4 pin is almost never played. Black now plays knight c6, d5, you give away the pawn with check, but you trade black's bishop. And black has this kind of gaping hole here of the dark squares. But Nepo is, you know, it's a Grunfeld, so he just jumps into the middle of the board. He's not worried about losing a pawn because white is lacking development, and black will just lash out at white with these pawn breaks. Well, Grischuk delays that move with bishop c4, but now Nepo plays e5. Now, every beginner here would play what? Oh, en passant. Oh. Yeah, except this is just a garbage trade for black. Like, this is terrible. Because now you've just opened up... sorry, it's a garbage trade for white. It's a great trade for black, because all these lines are open. Grischuk is not doing that. Instead, he castles. But this game wasn't insanely exciting. We get f4. The rook goes to b8 to guard b7, so you can move the bishop in the future. Takes. And we have a position where white is a little bit better. A little bit better, maybe because of the dominant central pawns. Maybe you can argue that f7's a little bit weak. So this is probably the position that Grischuk envisioned that he would get. But he can't really move the pawns. He moves one, he loses it. He moves one, he loses the other. So rook to f1, bishop to d7. Very nice tactical defense of this pawn, by the way. That is very nice. Look at this. What's worth more than a pawn? You. But also a bishop, and I hit the bishop. And if you take my pawn, I will lose, right? And if this. So we get bishop c4, and now we have the most exciting moment of the game, where in this position, Grischuk plays d6, opening up the bishop. We get bishop c4, and rook takes f7. Alexander Grischuk lost to a rook for bishop sacrifice yesterday, so he's very inspired. Clearly, he wanted bishop takes f7, rook takes f7, and pawn to d3. He was envisioning this, which would have led to a very complex position after e5, and just one pawn is running, while one guy is trying to blow the other guy's, head off here with this. You have rook f2 to come back and win this pawn, so probably Nepo would have played something like b5, a4, I don't know, something wild. But sadly, none of that happened. And Nepo saw a way to simplify into a rook endgame where all the pawns fly off the board. You say, Levy, slow down. I mean, this is what we got. We got rook and two, same side. This game doesn't get as much of a marquee feature. It was a relatively interesting game that went off the beaten path early, but a draw. Nepo gets his half a point and kind of maintains that grasp on that top spot. Grischuk gets a half a point for his standings. Third game of the day is the game between Liren and Maxime Vachier Lagrave. Now this one is going to be this is a weird game. This is the final appetizer before the main course. MVL lost a brutal game yesterday. He was suffering in the depths of hell in opening preparation against Fabiano, and then it was just a 6-hour game. So he's clearly going for his Grunfeld when Liren says, not so fast, buddy, h4. Okay. I mean, this move is just insanely disrespectful and mildly hilarious. I'm joking. It's not disrespectful, but it's just a funny move. Like, it's played, and Magnus Carlsen has played this against MVL. Grandmasters have played this. And it takes MVL out of the comforts of a Grunfeld because he's not able to put a pawn on d5. But he does get a position that resembles a Benoni, kind of, except white has played h4, okay? We're completely gone from opening theory at this point. I mean, we're just sort of on our own. The big question for black is whether you play h5 to stop white from playing h5, or you do what he does in the game, which is allow white to get this move h5. Queen to e7. That pins the bishop to the king. Now we have bishop to g5, and MVL takes on c3. This is a big decision. Obviously, the queen could not be taken because it was check. White damages their structure. White has completely immobile pawns. Black, on the other hand, has gotten rid of their dark squared bishop, but replaced it with just a cornucopia of dark squared pawns. And now g5, like literally, like a bowl of pawns here. Now we have castles. Despite launching your h-pawn all the way up the board, we have short castle because you're not really worried about losing this pawn. It's always kind of defended with the bishop and the queen. And white is going to try to play down the e-file. Knight goes back to e5. And in this position, we have the most gangster move of the entire game. Knight to d4. That's boss. That's a boss move. It's a boss move. Looks like you can't go there. MVL's entire setup is designed to clamp down. Nope, because if c takes d4, which is the move that's played in the game, c takes d4, you actually have to give away the knight. Because if you play a move like knight to f7 and say, haha, then bishop d3 and your position is a bit of a disaster. I mean, all these pawns are nice, but they get in the way of your pieces. That's why knights are so clumsy. They need space. They need to operate a little bit. They're so clumsy. They got no moves. So MVL says, you know what, just take my knight, dude. Just have it back. The problem is that even though he can take this back 4 different ways, they're all bad. All of them are bad. In the game, he took with the f-pawn. But if he took with the d-pawn, he gives me passed pawns, right? Or at least one. If he takes back with the queen, queen's just a target. I'm going to play rook e1, target the queen, bishop to d3, etc. You take back with the knight, you lose stability on the queen side. The knight will furthermore be a target in the future with moves like f4. So he takes with the f-pawn, but the drawback of that move, you block your pieces, and now you've got weaknesses all over the light squares. So we have bishop to e3, improving the position, b6, a4, and a5. And Liren uses a flank pawn break to open up the queen side and advantageously give himself dominance of the a-file. Computer here is hopeless. I mean, the computer is the Pablo Escobar meme at this point in the game. Literally, you plug this into an engine, it's sitting there like, why did I ever get into chess? I should have just been like I don't know. Should have like played any other game except this stupid game. Why? Black has nothing. According to the engine, black is hopeless. Why? Why? Big question, why? You are dominated on the a-file, okay? White is dominating you on the queen side. Your b-pawn is a horrible weakness. It looks like you have space here, but you don't. You don't have anything useful, okay? It's like buying a gigantic apartment and having no furniture, all right? I don't know how that analogy makes sense. Y'all know my analogies are like 1400 level. You want this knight on that square because that's the square you support the most. How are you gonna get there? Work backwards. Hey, both of these squares are occupied by your enemy. You're never going to utilize the square that you can use. And what does this bishop stare at? What? It's a car without a motor. Just looks nice. It can't do anything. So now Liren begins improving his position very slowly. And potentially one of the most impressive, and again, this is going to be a lot of filler moves. You know, you see that he lines up his attack on b6, and, you know, we have knight back to c5. But what's interesting is that trading off that car without a motor that you have is still bad. This is still bad because that was the only good piece you had. And now, ironically, the best move is to take. Why? Because black has to go like this. And so now we have a queen and rook endgame. Queen and 2 rook endgame. 5 pawns each. But one guy has a horrible weakness on b6. And that same guy that's going to win that pawn on b6 also has a passed pawn. MVL has a little bit of pressure down the f-file. And maybe he can break with these pawns to open up white's position. That's all MVL has. And okay, maybe you can argue that deep into the endgame, these pawns are weaknesses. So then, Liren slowly improved this position. Everything happened the way I'm describing. This pawn was pushed to gain a little bit of space. And the critical moment of this game kind of occurs like, this is move 35, so keep in mind that the players are a bit low on time. Rook f7. MVL just brings the rooks to this side, brings all the pieces, says, Ding, just take my pawn, man. Just take it. Like, you can have it. Take my pawn. Get your extra pawn advantage. I'm going to focus on this side of the board. Okay, I'm going to double up on this side of the board. You can have my pawn. And perhaps the game would have went like 30 more moves and Ding would have somehow realized this advantage. But Liren didn't like something. I don't know what he didn't like. I haven't spoken to him. I don't have his phone number. But instead, he invested in his d-pawn. Last two games ago, when Alekseenko pushed this pawn, it's because he had nothing else. He pushed that pawn in that rook and pawn endgame because he had nothing else. Liren goes for this, And MVL now swarms the pawn. He just swarms it. It went to the wrong part of town. And it looked at the wrong people. Y'all know, you walking into a place, you're not supposed to look anybody in the eye. Don't make eye contact. That pawn got too close, made eye contact. And now that pawn is gone. And now we have queen, rook, and 4 versus queen, rook, and 4. And white is still a little bit better. White is still a little bit better because this king is a little bit out in the open. Definitely a bit weaker than the white king. And Ding is trying. He's going to try his best. But the next 40 moves is just him trying. And there were moments that he could have taken a decisive advantage, but MVL just hung in there. He's not doing anything crazy. If you notice, they're just shuffling pieces around. But on move 60, Liren will get a little bit of time. And you might say, well, why is he just not going for the king? There's always tactics. Rook takes f3 check. And if queen takes, and now MVL's trying to win the game. So it's not so simple. And Ding is trying, and he's trying, and he's trying, and he's trying, but it's just a lot of repetition, and he just can't make progress. I went to Manhattan to see an apartment because I got to move soon, okay, earlier today. I came back to my house. This game was still going on. All of this was going on. They just were shuffling, and at this point now, it's a queen endgame, and they drew. There's a lot of checks given, and now on move 88, the game was agreed to a draw because of perpetual check. Ding Liren missed a big chance, and can we address the fact that if MVL had lost this game as well, that's 2 losses to start the second half of the tournament. Robert Hess, during the commentary, said that he thinks that MVL's candidates chances are still alive because he held this game. It was like +5, according to this, the supercomputers. But we have one more game, ladies and gentlemen. And that game is the game between Anish, Giri, and Wang Hao. Anish Giri begins with d4 and c4. We have something known as the Catalan, one of the best openings, period. I'm actually in the process of trying to learn it myself. Bishop to e7, bishop g2, and we have something known as the open Catalan. This is when black takes on c4. Black can also not take on c4 and play the closed Catalan, but the closed Catalan is just depressing. I mean, it's like a painting with no colors, D takes c4, and black essentially for the rest of the game tries to find various tactics against the c4 pawn. White plays a4 to stop b5. And now black plays a maneuver which just looks completely idiotic unless you know the Catalan theory. Bishop d7 and bishop c6. It looks like you're trying to, do some sort of weird Tetris movements with this bishop. But the point is that you try to counteract this bishop on g2. And we have a mainline position. Knight c3 is not as common as some of the other moves in this position. But really the most critical moment here, a5 is designed to get knight a6, knight b4. e3, knight a6, and we have this. And this is move 15. At this point, all of the theory is more or less kind of dissipated. Some games still remain, but Anish deliberately goes for this position, doubling his f-pawns for a dominant clamp on the center. This knight goes to b4, but white is going to argue that knight is not useful. It's nice on that square, but it's not useful like the bishop on f5 in the last game. Anish plays h3, a move that I believe, according to my database, has never been played before. I don't know if this is still his preparation or he just wants to show his opponent he knows how pawns move, but it's a waiting move, right? So it's a move, maybe in the future you can consider a move like knight to g4 to trade and open on the h-file. Maybe it's also to play king h2. The king is more useful on a square like this. It does end up there in the future. Plays h3. Black plays queen b6. And I guess the argument here is that black doesn't have a move that easily does nothing. You understand? Every move that black will play in this position comes with a drawback. It will weaken something else. Queen b6, for example, weakens some of the squares over here, and Anish goes back and immediately just goes for the queen, right? He wants to target the queen. Wang Hao plays c5. He's trying to clarify the position right away, but that weakens a lot of squares, and Anish will probably bring his rooks to the middle of the board. Whoa, how did I know that? I'm so good at chess. I didn't totally just see the game before making this video. C takes d4, and now rook takes d4. This transformation of pawn structure, this kind of weird one versus this standard one, actually benefits white in many ways. Because white has the open control of the center lines, right? White can put the queen on the long diagonal, and folks, don't forget that if white ever wants, that g-file is just a straightaway beeline at that enemy king. So Wang Hao plays rook to d8, and now Anish Giri trades and plays rook d1. Just very simple move, brings his rook to the middle of the board. And you would say, why wouldn't Wang Hao take with the rook? That looks so much more natural. Queen b5. Remember I said this move doesn't come, no move comes easy here for black. And if you trade, I'm going to play a b5. You say, oh, my pawns are doubled. Yeah, but I'm attacking this and this. You're going to lose a pawn. That's something in chess called superseding concepts. You don't want to apply general things too much. Double pawns are bad. What about winning a pawn against the Super Grandmaster? That's pretty good, right? So, superseding concepts. Some concepts matter more than others. So we get queen takes d8, rook d1, and now queen a8. Queen looking a little bit sus over there on a8. So we get king to g1, getting out of the way. Knight to b4, queen b5, knight d5, takes. And now a very smart move here by Anish. Rook c1, getting out of the way of the knight and just improving his rook. We have h6, waiting move, making a little bit of a luft for his king. And now Anish infiltrates with queen to d7. Just long-term nagging pressure here for Anish. At the same time, there are some vague threats of knight f7 maybe with rook to c8 check, something like that, some various tactics. So we have knight back to f6 and queen d6. He doesn't repeat moves. Queen d6, g6. Every move Wang Hao makes a slight weakness. Every pawn push, slight weakness. b3, waiting move. b3 is a waiting move. h5, okay, king h2. Trying to figure out what's going on. These pawns moving up is not the same as this pawn. It's not the same because those pawns are in front of the king. At any moment, Anish can hit you with one of these. Goes back to d4, lines up the queen like this. Rook d8, brings the queen back to b2. That was the idea of b3 also, is that the queen can camp behind the pawn, monitoring this line and monitoring this diagonal. Very nice idea by Anish. Queen b8. Now b4. Look at that. b3, bring the queen back, boop, b4. Okay, a b4, rook c4. No, the plan is to bring the rook while the knight and the king are paralyzed because of the dominance. Take and take. Gorgeous plan by Anish. b3, rook b4, still not taking because queen takes b3 would open up this, and more importantly, the knight can move. The problem here is this destabilization of that area. And because Wang Hao neglected it and moved his queen and rook too far away, rook b4, and now the big mistake, queen a7. I think there was something here, like he could have played queen d6, something, and then the computer wanted active defense, wanted him to get in there, but he goes this way, and now rook b3, because after queen a4, rook b7, this weakness is devastating. Queen e8, and look, ladies and gentlemen, watch this. Anish waits. He's a patient man. Rook takes f7 to get that queen is nice, but it's not a guaranteed win, because rook and knight can somehow... Anish says, nah, I don't need any of that. I don't need any of that. It's like that study. Kids were offered a cookie. They could eat it or wait 30 minutes for a second cookie. Anish was in the group that waited, 30 minutes. It was 30 minutes, not 30 seconds. 30 minutes for another cookie. So rook a7, rook d5, queen b7, knight e4, and knight takes f7. He cashes in. And by the way, I can take with check. And so, right? He doesn't take with check. Patience. Now the game is over. And here Wang Hao resigned. There's nothing he can do. For example, Wang Hao can play knight c5. Okay, knight c5, the idea being that you attack the queen. I'll just come back with check. And now any knight move later will kill you. So for example, king h7, I have knight g5 double check, and queen g7 defended by my rook. The board's a big place. Okay, so I have this beautiful thing, this queen going back to b2, all made possible by this super subtle move that Anish played on move 28, b3. All of Wang Hao's problems started after this plan was put into place. I wonder if Anish saw this all from a distance, b3, to go here, 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 and then this whole plan. Beautiful plan. I mean, what a plan. And that is why this video is named Defeating the Memes, Memes Defeated, because Anish Giri is the only winner of the day. He sliced through Wang Hao. Like, that was such a clean game. And now, ladies and gentlemen, we have to take a look at the standings, because obviously, we have a little bit of an update. Anish Giri being a winner. The standings look slightly different now. This is what they look like after 9 rounds. Nepo still up top with his draw. 3-way tie for second place. Half a point separates these guys out. Anish has played Nepo twice already. But some of these future matchups are very exciting. I believe tomorrow Anish plays MVL. MVL has the white pieces against Anish. But it's very important MVL save that game. Why? Because out of his next 5 games, MVL has 3 games with white, which is important. That means that he can put the pressure on these guys, try to get his prep. Obviously, the 2 Chinese players are struggling, but if you really take a look, 3.5 is not that far from 4, and after 4, it's 5. Not a single player has 4.5 points, so... Anyway, I'm very glad that I'm able to make these recaps for you in about half an hour time, 4 games, 30 minutes. Thank you once again, as always, if you made it this far in the video. I love you. Thank you for the support. Make sure to check out the courses on the website. Everything is 33% off, including bundles, and yeah, I will see you in the next one.